Hello, I'm Barbara Mueller, and you're seeing two beautiful people on your peacepodcast.org. Douglas Roche, Senator Honorable Douglas Roche. God bless you and thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Barbara.
You know, we go back a long time, and people look at us and they think, yeah, these are the wisdom keepers today. And yes, we are the wisdom keepers. I keep my wisdom inside sometimes because I do peacepodcast.org. And I hope you all will watch these podcasts. We now have almost 150 podcasts with our world's best known peacekeepers, authors, and UN officials. And I really would love to have you have a conversation because that's what's going to keep our world sane and move us into the progress of the culture of peace. Douglas Roche, I keep my wisdom on peacepodcast.org. You put it in a brand new book. Here's the book. Let me see if I can make a good, there we go.
Keep hope alive.
Keep hope alive. And in the preface, it says, dedicated to my colleagues who keep hope alive in the peace movement around the world.
You're one of those colleagues, Barbara.
God bless you. Thank you. Well, you know, as I look at you, I see all the years that you spent with Robert, and you and he wrote the book Safe Passage to the 21st Century.
In 1995, we did that book.
And we're still at this threshold of maybe we can have peace. And you had that beautiful composition. You know, Honorable Douglas Roche, I call him honorable because he has 9 honorary doctorates. People admire you. And he's an author, a parliamentarian, a diplomat who has specialized throughout his 50-year public career in peace and human security issues. Just exactly why I had you on today. The minute somebody said, have you read Douglas Roche's new book, Hope? And I said, no. Then I got it on Amazon. And then I said, I have to have him on. He has to give us the wisdom that he has accumulated on how we, and it has to be a we, can create peace on our planet. And with that, Douglas, I'm going to ask you the very first question. Well, how can we get the world to cooperate so we can have peace? Is there any way to do that?
Well, Barbara, coming out of World War II, it was terrible destruction, 120 million people killed. It was just awful. They did decide, the leaders of the major states did decide that they had to cooperate and started the United Nations. And if they could do that in the depths of the World War II, we can certainly honor what they did at the beginning and continue that process now as we are approaching the 80th anniversary of the start of the United Nations. And at this time, there are terrible conflicts in the world that are, upsetting us, depressing us, filling us with anxiety. When you look at Ukraine and Gaza and Sudan and other places where there's just horrible destruction of life, wanton destruction of life, and that discourages many people. And to that I say, if we had peace in the world, we wouldn't have to work for it. It's because we have wars today still that we do have to work and redouble our efforts to ensure that the United Nations, as it goes forward, can play a role in achieving a peaceful resolution of present conflicts.
Both you and Robert, my dear late husband, Robert Mueller, believe that the United Nations was our global voice, that together, as we meet in General Assembly and as we meet in the various committees, we have this potential of cooperation, not confrontation. Is that a good model?
We had a cooperation through the years of the Cold War. They were able to produce arms control agreements. They were able to later on produce the Millennium Development Goals, which were highly successful, and then led to the Sustainable Development Goals, a 15-year program between 2015 and 2030 to achieve 17 precise targets on education and health and particularly involving the rise of women in the world and protection and development of women's rights and extended benefits coming from the Sustainable Development Goals. And the Paris Agreement on the climate, the efforts that are being made, and as we're seeing now, even as we speak, the terrible hurricane heading into Florida. I mean, unknown quantities of destruction that we're witnessing now as a result of climate change. All of this has been dealt with and continues to be dealt with by the United Nations. And so, Barbara, it's the only place in the world where 193 states come together. And even though there is confrontation and there are failures within the UN system, all that being said, it is our principal hope for building a system, an international system that relies on cooperation, not just because we want to be nice to one another, that's a goal in itself, but because we must survive together. And the problems that are affecting our world today, whether they're in health or arms control or economic and social development, refugees, migration, all these problems are interconnected and they involve us. So we cannot escape the problems of the world. We must look for solutions for the sake of common survival. Our common survival is the basic premise of the United Nations today.
Boy, do I agree with everything you said. It's like you just gave us a litany of possibilities. I've always said mutually assured survival. I even have a website, mutually assured survival, shows that we have options. Right now, we have the option for peace and not nuclear warfare and not warfare at all. This is a $1 million, $1 trillion question because the armaments are raising so much anger on the planet, and the armament manufacturers are getting richer and richer. What can we do to step in their path to say, wait, halt, no more money for armaments? We make armaments because we make a profit. There's this huge show in Canada where they show all the armaments, and I read the advertisements. Don't miss out. Get your right gun here. What are they doing? Why is this a money-making, profitable war rather than a peacemaking world?
Well, the first thing is to recognize the power of the military-industrial complex. Arms sales in the world are now exceeding $1.2 trillion. It's an unheard of sum that is sapping money from, as I would say, directly stealing money from the poor of the world who need that money for education, for water systems, for health systems, for all manner of hygiene and the normal processes of development. And we're being set back as a result of the arms race. We must understand the power of the military-industrial complex. Secondly, what to do about it? Well, to stand up for the United Nations program of Sustainable Development Goals and let our politicians and our political leaders know that we are supporting. Barbara, it's the silence of so many good people today that is disturbing. Look, I don't want to lay too much of a trip on very good people who are going to be watching this podcast this program. People are incensed and they want to help, but they're not sure what to do. Well, as a longtime politician myself, I say the first thing they do is to reach out into the political establishment with simple letters, communications, phone calls, letting our political leaders, wherever they are, know that we are supporting programs for development, not programs for more war. And
Mm-hmm.
thus, to put the proper financing into the Sustainable Development Goals, to give prioritization in the decision-making processes for political policies that do lead to a cooperative dialogues. This business that we can't dialogue with Russia because we'll be too weak. We can't dialogue with China. We can't dialogue with Iran. We must dialogue. Diplomacy, Barbara, diplomacy was not made for people to have tea every Sunday afternoon. Diplomacy was made so that enemies could have a dialogue for their mutual survival. And so we have to realize the depth of the problem in the world today as a result of globalized issues that have now extended around the world in issues of health and arms and economic and social development and refugees. I mean, the outpouring of refugees alone is going to be upsetting to the structures, to the established structures. So instead of being overwhelmed by all this, I'm in favor of people taking a simple, not a simple, but I mean, but a clear approach to the building and the restoration of our human rights, and that has been encapsulated by the United Nations in the development of a culture of peace. What is a culture of peace? A culture of peace is a system of mutual respect and cooperation among governments that relies on nonviolence. Nonviolence as a centerpiece of how we will live. That is what the United Nations stands for. We have to keep that goal uppermost in our mind.
Absolutely. As you're listening to Senator Douglas Roche from Canada, you realize that his passion just spews into your DNA and you want to do something. And maybe you don't feel comfortable doing something. Well, let me tell you, go to peacepodcast.org and listen to Sam Daly Harris. It's a 15-minute podcast on how to be a transformational advocate, he wrote the book, Restoring Our Democracy, Transformational Advocacy by the People for the World. And this transformational advocacy uses one model, EPIC. Enjoy your life, but also know what you want to say when you're going to be an advocate. In other words, engage the person you're listening to, like I engaged Douglas today. Then you give them the problem. You know, Douglas, the problem today is war. And then you go to EPI, inform him of what the United Nations is doing, and then a call to action. This is the key. What do you want that person you're talking to do? You'll get that on Sam Daly Harris's Peace Podcast. So I'm listening to you, Douglas, and you definitely know what's going on, and you definitely know how we can solve our kind of a horror that's on the planet now. It's kind of like an epidemic of horror. But the vision that you held in your book, Hope, Essays of a War-Free World, that's exactly what the Pope said. Now, hold on a second. I'm going to move over here for a minute. When Robert was at the United Nations, he said, Secretary General Outant said, we're never going to have peace on the planet until we have a spiritual voice. And Robert invited the Pope, since they were a member of the Vatican, was a member of the UNA. And what does it say up in the corner? Never again war. So we know we don't want war. The Pope's saying they don't want war. Everyone's saying they don't want war. It's up to us, right, Douglas? To tell our elected officials, to tell government. I may be guilty of not telling enough people, but I put my podcast together, and you even have a chapter on why my podcast is possible. Zoom and the peace community. Invite your elected officials to meet with you, but practice. Don't just call them up and say, I want to tell you something. You have to know exactly what you're going to say and what is their call to action. Am I on the right path?
A call to action and to hope. I just want to say a short word, Barbara, about hope.
Okay.
Like the title of the book is Keep Hope Alive. Well, I mean, what is hope? Hope is not something that's going to be served to you on a platter when you go into a restaurant or something. Hope is something from within us that has to be energized. And we find hope by activating our conscience. I mean, we're human beings. We have intellects. We have a conscience, and now we have a global conscience of understanding that we have to protect and respect the human rights of everyone in the world. And if we don't do that, weapons of mass destruction are going to take over. And weapons of mass destruction and human rights are incompatible. And so to realize that within us, we have a conscience that directs us forward to helping other people, whether it's donations or education or involvement in a civil society organization, an involvement in a development one, an arms control one, and an environmental one, or a human rights one. I mean, those are the main areas of activity. And when we involve ourselves, Barbara, when we just reach out, when we touch another person in a forward movement, that energizes the hope within us, and we find ourselves energized. This is what happens to me all the time. It's actually what gets me out of bed in the morning when I realize that I'm only one person, but I do have a capacity, just as everybody does, a capacity to reach out and touch someone in a measure of respect, nonviolence, and hope. That builds a culture of peace. That is very important, that people realize that they have an empowerment within themselves, and the exercise of that empowerment builds hope.
The exercise of that empowerment, our conscience builds hope. I find myself getting out of bed in the morning filled with hope. And I feel myself telling myself every day and every way I'm getting better, and so is the world. If you keep thinking, and so is the world, not only a personal approach, but the world approach to our problems, to use the United Nations. Thank Secretary General Antonio Guterres when he's done something right that you agree with. Write a letter. I remember Martin Luther King said, I cannot be silent when a war is going on. And so here we are, not being silent about our possibilities. And as you heard Douglas Roche from Canada say, hope is that conscience that tells you. I never forget one of my interviews with Ben Ferencz, who was the Nuremberg trial lawyer. He was 100 when I interviewed him on peacepodcast.org. And he said, it takes courage not to be discouraged. And he also said, these things like perfectly decent people in a war are created as criminals and murderers. Perfectly decent people. And so we, the perfectly decent people, have to use our voices, right, Douglas, to create the hope in the world. Touch somebody, call somebody.
People cannot wait for the Secretary General to do it all of the United Nations. We can't all be the Secretary General, but all of us can touch another human being in an atmosphere of hope and action.
You know, you're absolutely right. Even research backs it up. You can put all the ads on the world about something, but if your best friend tells you something, you listen. It's when your best friend tells you something, you listen, right, Douglas?
A final word on the United Nations itself. They just had a summit of the future. That's the first time the UN has projected out into the future. And it took 4 years to build it up, and they had a 2-day meeting in September. And they developed out of that a pact for the future that all the states have signed on to. And it's got 56 programs in it. I mean, it's a wide-ranging thing. But
That's very ambitious.
it's essentially governments pledging anew, despite the wars that are going on, that they will make an effort to cooperate in arms control and in economic and social development and the development of women's rights. There's a long list of activities that are the framework, so to speak, for a culture of peace. And so we're not like bereft of not knowing what to do. We do have the knowledge. We do have it. We have to employ that knowledge in a good spirit that we maintain ourselves by reaching out and keeping our minds open and active.
Wow. I love that. Keep your mind open and active is like a motto. That means pay attention, love those you're with, love the people that you can influence, and get on the phone or get on Zoom. I remember reading your book, and your sister, who was 92 at the time you wrote the book, said, I just had a family reunion on Zoom, and you were shocked because you didn't know she was using Zoom.
Yeah. She surprised me.
Well, you know, Zoom is my salvation. We have 150 now podcasts on Zoom with world peacekeepers. Some are no longer on the planet, but I've captured their essence. I've captured their wisdom. When my husband, Robert Mueller, who you knew so well, your very dear friend, died in 2010, I could have said, oh no, what am I going to do? But I didn't. I said, I'm going to start peacepodcast.org, and I'm going to take all those people he introduced me to, including you, Douglas Roche. I would never have met you if it wouldn't have been for Robert. And now I can share your wisdom with the world. And I hope you're paying attention to Douglas Roche. And I'm going to suggest you do something else. You're going to see all the stickies around my book because I've been reading it, and I keep these little stickies in to remind me. Zoom in the peace community. I have a sticky there. There is an area where Canada could shine in fostering international dialogue. But to do this, we would have to care enough about the past, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And you wrote enough. You wrote this book to bring us, as your friend said, as our world sits on the edge of great technology, technological, social, and environmental change, humanity's most valuable tools will not be weapons or AI, but the wisdom. And enter Douglas Roche. That's on the back. And everybody reads the back first. So, Douglas, you are reaching out to the world through this Zoom call. What would you like the world to do, and what would you like them to know for your last words today?
That we all have within us capacity to help make the world a little better place, even by a simple communication, raising our voice, joining an organization, writing a letter, finding an activity that is suitable for what we can do. And just that simple act of reaching out energizes our hope, and stimulates us to go forward, and to be able to cope and deal with the adverse headlines of the day. We shall overcome. That's what Martin Luther King said. We should never forget those words and apply them in our own lives. We will overcome the adversity of today by the exercise of the hope that is within us, and that the United Nations has given us a plan to exercise.
Douglas Roche, I just cannot tell you how much I appreciate what you just now said. In a way, it allows us to go forward now. We must go forward, because if we don't go forward with our voices, our love, and our conscience, we're not going to be moving as quickly as we would like. And Douglas Roche, your book, as I said before, Keep Hope Alive, Essays for a War-Free World. That's my goal. I want a war-free world. I want all those people in refugee camps to be able to raise their children with clean water and good food, but it's not going to happen in war-torn areas. Douglas, I love you. I love your life of 95 years and keeping us on our toes. You've written 25 books. I think we could find your list of books on Amazon, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yes,
what I got.
books are many of my books are on Amazon. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, well, this is a man who not only talks and walks, but he writes about it. And I am so grateful you're my friend. Wish you were a little closer, just because I love you and I want to see you. But I see you on Zoom, and keeping hope alive is my pleasure.
This is, Barbara, this is part of the modern world. We are together now. We're together in spirit to begin with, but also together on Zoom, that we can interact this way. And what a wonderful world it is. We have this kind of communication. We're not lost in a desert someplace. We are together.
We are together. I appreciate those words, and I love these Zoom calls. And so, people, I'm going to ask you to invite 3 friends to sit down with you and watch Douglas Roche and his comments today. Have a conversation, and don't be shy. You can write Douglas a little email. You can send it to me, Barbara Mueller 2323 at gmail.com, and think about some of the things you could do. Ask your city council to become an international city of peace. You can do so many things. Put up a peace pole. The most important part, as so many of the people have said, including Eleanor Roosevelt, remember, you count. You have the right to say what you feel. Don't be shy. Tell your elected officials what you want. Douglas, you have the last word.
Thank you for this, Barbara. You're an inspiration to me, and thank you for having me on this podcast that will go out around the world. And I want to encourage people, as I've said over the last few minutes, not to lose hope. but to exercise the hope that is already within them. So.
Amen. I'm Barbara Gone-Mueller. You are listening to peacepodcast.org for mutually assured survival and happiness. And with that, I bless you. Have your friends join you on peacepodcast.org and have a conversation.